Welcome out there in the interwebs. It is Ginger here again with another episode of Fighting the Void. And today we are going back to a little bit lighter content. And we're discussing kind of the state of the comic book industry with none other than Jacob Airey of the Jacob Airey blog. And he does movie reviews, comic reviews. He's even written a novel, as I understand it, which you can find on Amazon. And like I said, we're just going to sit back, talk, have a good time, and kind of just hash some stuff out because I'm not entirely sure what's going on. And I know, Jacob, you follow the comic world a little bit closer than I do these days. So first of all, thanks for coming back on the show. This is got to be, I don't know, your third, maybe fourth visit.
I think it's my third time. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me back.
Always a pleasure.
Oh, no, I think it's the fourth. It is the fourth.
It might be the fourth. I think the first time was the big debate on the Snyder Cut.
Right. And then a Halloween episode, and then you had me on to talk about my novel. So yeah, I think that's so I think this is the fourth.
Well, there you go. Okay. So, like I said, you follow comics a little bit closer than I do. But I do know that there's been talk that it's been struggling basically since the speculator bubble burst in the 90s, which I was around for. That was kind of the heyday of my own comic collecting, was sort of the late 90s. And ever since then, it's kind of like you get the impression that it's been just kind of limping along.
Right.
And one certainly would naturally expect that the movies and everything, right, with so much popularity, I mean, even ones that most people think are mediocre, like Captain Marvel, pulled out $1 billion just by strength of the brand. Right. And but it's not translating into comic sales.
Yeah, and I honestly think Marvel made a big mistake. And one thing that's sustaining Marvel is Marvel Entertainment was very smart because they just tied everything together. Even before the Disney acquisition, they tied everything with Marvel Entertainment. So like if the films were weak, the comics could sustain them. If the comics are weak, the films could sustain them. Mm-hmm. But they did make a very calculated risk that went all wrong. Whenever the movies premiered and they introduced kind of the movie version of Iron Man and Black Widow, your first thought is, okay, the comics have to match up a little bit, right? We don't want to be exactly like the movies, otherwise people just be tired of the same. But they need to at least have like the same members. And they did do that with Guardians of the Galaxy. But with everything else, they changed up the roster incredibly. That was when, of course, they brought in Lady Thor. They brought in Ironheart because the Captain Marvel killed Tony Stark at the end of Civil War II. Oh. It was at first there was this debate whether he was actually in a coma or if he was dead, but they actually did confirm last month that he is in fact dead. The current Tony Stark is an android. So built specifically by Tony Stark before his demise to battle Ultron, is my understanding.
Okay.
And but anyway, so they kind of messed that up, and then they tried to recover because they got Jason Aaron, who had a really successful run on the Hulk in the early 2000s and Ultimate Captain America, and so they brought him back to do the Avengers. He had a great start, and about issue, I would say 18. He did this flashback where he did Avengers 1 million BC, and it was completely a bonkers story arc. It made me lose interest.
I remember hearing about it.
Yes, yeah. It was like Odin, the original Phoenix, the original Iron Fist, who of course is a woman, and the original Black Panther, and all these other like prehistoric, a Ghost Rider who has a woolly mammoth. And
okay, there's a part of me that really wants to see that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that guy was actually pretty cool. The Ghost Rider with the woolly mammoth was actually the coolest of those characters.
the coolest imagery. Anyway, sorry, you totally distracted me with that.
but anyway, it was just like a real bonkers story because it had a great arc where they were setting up Namor to be the villain, and you're kind of excited about this. And then it just falls apart with this 1 million BC story arc. And then DC, I don't know what their problem is. They are all over the map with their titles. It is insane. I have, which I mentioned beforehand, Batman Detective Comics 1000. This is the original cover by artist Jim Lee. He's one of my favorite artists.
He's a great artist. It has been since the 90s. Yep.
Oh yeah, and this was actually the #1 seller of 2019. Not really that hard to believe. And he also did for the back for his variant.
Oh, nice.
But it was a bestseller for this reason. They had 10 different variants, and I of course had to get my favorite artist. I got the Greg Capullo variant right there.
Yep.
This is the Steve Rude variant right now, and then Neil Adams, who actually got signed when I went to Comic-Con.
Oh, you got the Neil Adams one signed.
Oh yeah, Neil Adams is actually one of my favorite Batman writers. His artwork, I'm not as impressed with his writing, but still, I had to get it. I got him to sign it. He owns a comic book store here in LA that I love. But like I said, they're really sporadic. Because you have titles like I believe it's Dark Horse is doing the series called Undiscovered Country, and is it Dark Horse or it might be Boom Studios? I can't remember. Someone will correct me in the comments, but. It's about America has been walled off. They built Trump's wall, right? But there's like a disease coming from it, and then all of a sudden the door opens, and so they're sending in this, like 20 years later, they're sending in these people to discover America, and it's titles like that are overtaking Marvel and DC, where that wouldn't have been heard of in the 90s and early 2000s.
Right. I mean, really, back in the day, the threat to Marvel and DC was really, well, there were kind of two, and that was Image, of course, and Jim Lee, and all Mark Silvestri, Rob Liefeld, Todd McFarlane, all the biggest artists of the day got together and tried to start their own comic book company, which showed a lot of promise at first. And of course, there was Valiant Comics, which had its own heyday back in the early and mid 90s. Yeah,
and they're even starting to make a comeback. They're actually because of they got a film deal. They're going to do Bloodshot with Vin Diesel is playing.
Yeah, that's coming out soon, actually.
Yeah. It actually looks pretty good. I was actually at the Comic-Con where they released the trailer, and that was a really cool experience. You got a free comic book with it. It was awesome. I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I like some of the new version of Valiant. I think it's pretty good. I prefer the original Valiant, to be honest. But yeah, some of that's a little nostalgia. Some of it's also the fact that the new Valiant is a little bit like the modern comic industry, in that unless you very much follow it, it's really hard to kind of keep track of what's going on.
Right.
I haven't done ongoing comic collecting since like 2001, 2002. But I buy stuff when it's on sale in Comixology and stuff from time to time. And of course, I just, scrolling headlines and stuff, you kind of get an idea of what's going on for the most part. But one thing I've noticed, and this is across the board, well, this is Valiant to an extent, but especially Marvel and DC. Image is totally different than when it began.
Oh yeah, way different.
It was initially something of a vaguely cohesive universe, but before you knew it, all of the different artists and everything, they essentially had their own production companies that were all under the Image banner, and they all split off. Jim Lee's Homage became integrated with DC to the point where their characters for a while regularly showed up at DC Comics. I don't think they do much anymore.
And then one character, Helga, I believe, she was introduced in Spawn. She's now in the Thor comic books.
Oh, Angela,
that's right, Angela.
Yeah, that was a whole weird copyright fight between Neil Gaiman and Todd McFarlane, who she was essentially Gaiman's creation, and he got the rights and I think promptly sold them to Marvel.
Right, yeah. It was, yeah, he's kind of, because he had a similar spat with Frank Miller, I believe, and with Todd McFarlane for a while. Frank Miller was writing Spawn, and he did have at least some involvement. Yeah, it was kind of a big deal. They said that's why DC was able to get Frank Miller back, was because Image, or in particular McFarlane, allegedly, don't come after me, Todd McFarlane. I hear he's very litigious. allegedly McFarlane treated Miller really poorly with the rights to the characters Miller had created for Spawn. And so, and it was crazy because Miller even did a Spawn Batman crossover.
Yeah, which
during this time
sucked. I hated that so much.
I have not read it yet. I'm not a huge Spawn fan, so I haven't read it yet.
I was back then. I back again in Image's heyday. I really liked Spawn, and of course, because of the Dark Knight, because the Dark Knight Returns, I loved Frank Miller, and I was like, and of course, I love Batman because everybody loves Batman.
Right.
It was like Spawn, Batman, Frank Miller, Todd Mc. How could this not be awesome? Oh, this is how.
Yeah.
and honestly, it was after that.
It's like, why?
We're a little all over the place here, which is appropriate. Right. But it was after that. Actually, it was after those crossovers that I noticed that Spawn's quality took a nosedive.
Yeah,
it was like really good, and then all of a sudden when
well, and Richard Meyer, I listened to his show, Ya Boy Zach. I don't know why it's called that. It used to be called Diversity in Comics. Now he calls it Ya Boy Zach. But he has he made a really good point one time. Is they're trying too hard to force the artists to become writers because they don't want to pay two people. Before, it would be, Bob Kane was the idea man. Bill Finger and Jerry Robinson would bring him to life. And of course, Bill Finger, we found out later, was way more involved than Bob Kane originally let on.
Yeah.
But still,
don't get fingered. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yes, exactly. There's a great documentary on Hulu about that. I highly recommend. It's called Batman and Bill. And but anyway, it was the same with Marvel. Stan Lee was the idea man. Steve Ditko brought it to life. And although Stan Lee maintains that he was the driving force behind Spider-Man, I have no reason to doubt him. But Steve Ditko obviously heavily involved with Doctor Strange. In fact, they match. Doctor Strange and Spider-Man's hand gestures match. And
I never noticed that, but
right, but yeah, right. But later it got to where they're saying, okay, we don't want to hire two people. We want now you have Sean Gordon Murphy, who is a fantastic artist. Now he's also writing Batman White Knight, which I did a whole when my old vlog was up. I did a whole breakdown of why I hated that comic series. Just thought it was a disaster, but great artwork. Sean Gordon Murphy, keep on saying Murphy. He's a fantastic artist. His artwork is top notch, but I just don't think he cuts it as a writer. And Richard Meyer, he kind of has noticed this. There's this trend where they'll either put really good writers with really bad artists, or really good artists with really bad writers, or they'll try to force them to do both. And I think that's a really good point. I've noticed that, especially with some of the stuff lately, that like Tom King is a good example. He just finished his Batman run. So much freaking dialogue. You just are like, turn it down, man. I don't care about Batman waxing philosophy with Bane. I want to see him beat him up. And
right.
Yeah. And it's also become a gimmick game. This is I've noticed that they keep doing these gimmicks. So like they did this big thing.
That's going right back to the 90s.
Right. Yeah.
And what created the bubble, the pop, and what set that tone for we're just limping along.
Right.
Ever since. Now to kind of get it back a little bit, and it actually kind of fits up with the gimmick point you were about to make is they keep doing constant reboots. I don't even mean just the constant like universe reboots, which I think DC's probably got the gold medal for that right now.
Right.
But Marvel does them too. They just do it differently. It's not necessarily total timeline setting reboots. They just keep doing these massive shakeups, massive resets of the characters, who's on what team, and this, that, and the other thing, and constant number ones.
Yes. They figured out number one sell really well.
Well, yeah. It's like you never know where you are in the story anymore. I remember it used to be if a new title comes out, or it's like there's a big event or something, they'll market it as a new jumping on point or something like that. Or if like somebody hasn't had an ongoing for a while, but now they're bringing it back or whatever. Okay, fine. But like every year or two, you're rebooting a series.
And it used
Stop
to be,
it. And that's just rebooting it with new storyline, new creators. No, you're rebooting it with number one. You never know where you are anymore.
Yeah, and that's true. In fact, there's a running joke. Oh, his name escapes me, but there was a Daredevil writer who actually ended up writing for 3 volumes of Daredevil, and they each start with number one. And so, and before, what they used to do is, so if they wanted to start over with a number one, they would at least change the title a little bit. So Detective Comics became Batman Detective Comics, or it became Detective Comics starring Batman. And then for a while they did, I don't know why, Detective Comics starring Batwoman. That was from out of the Final Crisis. And so of course they realized their mistake and brought Batman back right away. But I have noticed these reboots, and what Marvel used to do, which was really clever, was when they wanted to reboot a character, they would do a soft reboot. So, for instance, Iron Man, his original origin involved the Vietnam War. In fact, the first villain he fought was a Viet Cong. They don't talk about that anymore.
Right.
And and so then they did Iron Man Extremis, and they made it where, and that was a soft reboot where it was the Afghan War, and the first villain he fought was a member of the Taliban. Taliban, and so that made more sense, because then you just go, okay, well now I know what it is. And then I believe they did a redo of Secret Wars, which, like you said, it completely reset it. And then they've done 2 others since then. DC has always, that's like their thing. It used to be every 5 years you could expect a reboot, but now
it was even longer. Like every 10 years they would get around to doing like a massive universe setting reboot, which, if you're intent on keeping the exact same characters and everything, it makes sense.
Right.
Because, then you get to retouch the origin a little bit and everything, and, make it so it isn't like they've been running around doing this since the 40s.
Right.
It's like that. As far as that goes, okay, I get that. That makes sense. And I'm okay with a once, maybe even twice a decade massive event that, shakes things up, cleans up the continuity a little bit. I'm all right with that. But now it's like every other year.
Right. And
it's annoying as all heck. I mean, I remember one, and they don't even last long. Like the one that I really remember, this might go back to when I was still reading Wizard, or maybe I just was browsing through it or something. I don't know. There was a reboot where Batman was actually Jim Gordon in some sort of weird cyber suit.
Oh yeah, that was during the New 52. Yes.
Okay, that was the New 52. No, I wasn't reading Wizard anymore. Like a long time ago.
Everyone hated that, by the way. You were not alone.
Well, I looked at it and I'm like, this is going to last 15 minutes.
Yes.
There's no way in hell this is going to catch on. No one's going to like it. They're going to forget this ever happened in about, oh, wait, yeah, it already did.
Oh, yeah, and it actually hurt Scott Snyder's reputation a little bit. And now, to be fair to him, that might have been a studio decision. Because sometimes I've heard Frank Miller and Tom King and Neil Adams have all complained about studio interference. Christopher Priest, the whole reason he left DC and went to Dynamite was they wouldn't let him write Batman. He had just done Batman versus Deathstroke. And then they were like, oh, we're going to put you on our black superhero, because for those of you who don't know, Christopher Priest is black. And he's like, but I want to keep writing Batman. And they said, well, no, we're going to let someone else do that. And so then he tried to go to Marvel, and they were like, oh, great, we'll put you on Luke Cage. And he's like, I don't want to work on Luke Cage. I want to work on Wolverine, because he had done Wolverine in the past. And so he ended up going to Dynamite, and they gave him Vampirella, which, by the way, since he took it over, has been selling really well.
Really?
So,
okay.
Not to the tier of your more popular heroes, but it's basically it's become one of their top sellers, and the company's top sellers.
Oh, well, good, and good for him too.
He's a great writer.
Like, no, I'm not going to be your freaking token black guy working on your token black comic. I want to write what I want to write, not something that's going to make the SJWs happy. I don't care.
Oh, they were mad when he took over Vampirella, because they thought he was an ally, which, for those of you who don't know, Vampirella basically wears a swimsuit. That's her costume.
Oh, yeah. But let's face it, it's not even much of a swimsuit.
And so the SJWs got all mad at him because he started writing this character, and not dressed appropriately, I guess, especially me being an evangelical. But, I kind of am chuckling. It makes me want to read it, though, knowing that they're mad about it,
I know exactly what you mean. It's like, oh, you guys are pissed off? Honestly, I was kind of avoiding it, not even for totally dissimilar reasons, but you guys are mad, so I kind of want to make you more mad.
Right, exactly.
Which isn't the most Christian thing I could possibly do, but it's only $4.
Right, yeah, exactly. $4, and a prayer at bedtime, good to go.
Sold. And not to mention, if it's well written, I mean, hey, I've heard it's not too different from the argument made in favor of watching Game of Thrones.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, you should have my former colleague Paul Bois on. He has some thoughts about Game of Thrones that are really interesting. So,
I'm curious, is he a fan or not? Or?
No, he's not a fan. He wrote an article that was titled "Game of Thrones is porn," and
we would probably see eye to eye then, because I haven't had any interest in touching Game of Thrones with a freaking 10-foot pole. And the only thing I've ever heard that makes me at all remotely interested is the whole Night Watch. But I'm like, that's all there is.
Well, for me, there's this anime called The Rising of the Shield Hero, and I'm an anime fan, but I don't like the ones with long titles, and I don't know why. I just have an aversion to really long titles. But Anime News Network, their SJW writer wrote a whole review of the first episode. I turned right around, got on my Funimation app, and watched it, and I loved it. And
what was the name of it again?
Say again.
What was the show or whatever?
It's called The Rising of the Shield Hero. It's about just this regular Japanese student. He kind of gets sucked into this fantasy world, but the fantasy plays out like a video game. So he has like a VR thing, and that's how he can access his powers. And he has this magic shield. And then there are other heroes who have more powerful weapons, allegedly, that kind of make fun of him for just having a shield. And he gets falsely accused of sexual assault or attempted sexual assault. And he becomes like this bitter loner, and all because of this false accusation. And the SJWs hated it. In fact, Anime News Network, after season 1, rated it 2019's worst anime. And just for that reason.
Right? Okay, you heard it here, people. Go watch Rise of the Shield Hero, because it pisses SJWs off, and for no other reason.
Cartoon Network plays the Funimation translation, is my understanding.
Okay, all right. But yeah, and I notice Jake Wilson over in the comments, he's commenting on the whole that the whole having a minority write a minority character, that's its own gimmick.
Yes.
In a way, it's as much of a gimmick, has constant number ones.
Right.
And everything. Now, I've heard a lot about, sales and stuff for comics and everything are pretty poor.
Yeah.
Overall. Now, I haven't really followed the numbers. I also heard that 2019 was actually fairly strong. But that was on Screen Rant, and honestly, I had to kind of take Screen Rant with a grain of salt.
In 2019, well, it was a big year because it was Superman 1000, or I'm sorry, that was 2018. I apologize. Detective Comics 1000, and then Boom Studios reintroduced. They started doing like kid versions of Marvel Comics. Or I'm sorry, that was IDW. IDW started doing kids version of Marvel Comics. I don't know why Marvel is licensing out their kids versions, and so they have. I think they're called they have like Marvel Action Spider-Man, and it's like it's like for readers who are like 12, basically. Okay. I still kind of enjoy them sometimes, but still kiddish. They reintroduced the Sonic the Hedgehog. Archie Comics had done Sonic the Hedgehog since I was a kid. I think since I was in kindergarten. Mm-hmm. And then IDW got the rights from Sega, and so they rebooted Sonic, and it was actually, I actually enjoyed it, but again, it was written for kids. Sonic the Hedgehog. Right. So 2019 was kind of a strong year. They rebooted their Transformers. They were trying to connect it more with Generation 1. The comic books, for whatever reason, whatever company has Transformers, whenever they license out that property, they want to make it as different as possible from the show. Don't know why. Like they did this, like in the show, RC, she's a female Autobot. Mm-hmm. In the comic, the first, I think it was called Dreamwave Comics. They're now defunct. They totally went out of their way to say RC was not a female Autobot. She just happened, or I say she because I'm used to saying it from the 80s show. She just happened to have female qualities. Robots don't have a gender. And yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That's so they rebooted it and kind of restored that aspect of it and whatnot. And I read the first issue, but it didn't really impress me. I was not impressed with it. But that was why all these new number ones. You've got Transformers #1, Spawn 300 came out last year, Detective Comics 1000, the Batman 50, which was the big wedding issue that was, spoiler alert, not that great. And
well, yeah, they were winding up not being a wedding.
Right,
Spoilers. Spoilers, people. Sorry.
Because they did all these gimmicks and everyone was expecting more. And it just ended up, as the year goes on, you can watch the sales just slide down. And like I said, some of the lower tier comic companies are starting to break into the top 10, not because they're doing better, but because DC and Marvel are doing worse.
Now that's interesting. I had a sales chart up just a little while ago. What's that? Is
it Comicron?
No, let's see. It's from comicsbeat.com, and I think they're using Diamond's data.
Yeah, Diamond Distributors, right?
Yeah, and let's see here. There was now just from January to from December of 2019 to January 2020, sales were down like almost 2.5%.
Yeah.
Year on year, it was according to the 6.7% in terms of dollar sales for comics. It looks like, interestingly, graphic novels might have actually been up, which is fascinating.
And here's the key to that: it's older graphic novels. People are rebuying Batman,
repackaging a lot of their old stuff. That makes sense. And I noticed toys are up a little bit, but again, that's not comics.
Right.
The total comics and graphic novels still down 3.26% year on year. So it's like the graphic novels are helping, but only a little. They're kind of taking the edge off, essentially.
Right. And also, a lot of people don't realize this, but one thing that Marvel does, which is very, very clever, is Marvel actually has a library program. And they'll actually sell their comic books for just a little profit to all these libraries. They'll call and they'll say, "Hey, do you want to attract teenagers to your library? Why don't you buy?"
So that helps boost their revenue.
That's actually Gail Simone. How she stays popular is because she keeps claiming, "Oh, my comic books are doing really well," but she's part of the Marvel library program now. Ever since Marvel pinched her from DC. Gail Simone.
She used to write Catwoman, right?
Yes, she wrote Catwoman, and she wrote the New 52 Batgirl, which is actually a really good series. The Batgirl, to clarify, not the Batman had a great start, but then, like you said, the Mech Commissioner Gordon Batman and all that. But she actually had a really good run on Batgirl, and she's taken over some of like the weirder kind of stuff from Marvel. I think they just have a contract with her, and so they're just giving her stuff to write until her contract is up. They can't fire her because then she goes all over Twitter and complains about misogyny. So
right, yeah, and I don't know much about her, but I know enough to know that's probably what would happen.
I actually had a friend who there's this big Comic-Con that happens in Shanghai of all places, and all the companies bring in their stuff from America. And I actually have a friend who worked for I don't want to give him away, so I won't say the franchise, but he worked for an anime franchise, and the same time he was doing his spiel for his company, right next door, Gail Simone was doing her spiel. I think she had just started at Marvel. My friend had tripled the crowd for his Japanese English translation of a Japanese show than she did for her Marvel stuff. And it's something he's really proud of. He got a buddy of his made a side-by-side picture, and it's like my friend, he's like facing the audience, and it's a packed out house. Then it shows on the left, it's Gail Simone, and it's like a quarter of the room is filled. It's really funny.
Ah, that sucks. Such for her. Oh well. So
yeah, exactly. Oh well.
And one more thing, one more large thing on how the comic industry is clearly in some sort of possibly increased turmoil, and then I want to talk a little bit about maybe why. Is Dan probably Didio, whatever you say his name?
Yeah, Dio, I think.
Sure.
Dan
just got canned from DC, and he's been like a bigwig there for a long time.
Yes.
Like for freaking ever.
Right.
I said I haven't followed much, but I recognize the name. I knew he was a bigwig there going way back, so he's been there a long time.
Mm-hmm.
He just got canned rather unceremoniously, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently a lot of the bigwigs at DC have been canned in fairly recent times. About the only one that's left, I think, since Warner Brothers merged with AT&T is Jim Lee.
Yeah, and Jeff Johns. Jeff Johns is still there.
Is he still there?
Yeah, he's the chief creative officer. Or no, I'm sorry, that's Jim Lee. I can't remember what his title is, but he's still there.
Is he more associated with the movie side now?
Yes, but he still writes occasionally for them.
Okay. But not, regardless. Then there's been a lot of shaking up there.
Yes.
But Dan getting canned all of a sudden is a kind of a big deal because he was planning this other big freaking reshape event. Yeah, reboot number 9,000 at this point. I saw that, I'm like, you've got to be effing kidding me. And then I saw they named it 5G, and I'm like, what does 5G have to do with Dan? Oh, that's the name of a comic event. You guys are stupid. Apparently, they're going to rename it 5th Generation, which is a smart move, at least as far as that goes. But I guess the point of it was they would age out all of the characters that they've been with for a long time, and then have younger people come in and fill the roles essentially. Which
I have to admit I'm not too familiar with the 5th Generation. This move actually shocks me a little bit because forever DC Comics has hated Wally West, who of course was the very first Kid Flash.
Yep.
They killed him off in a very first they erased him from history. Him and Donna Troy, who was the first Wonder Girl, really two very important members of the Teen Titans. They erased them from history. So then they bring him back. They introduced another character who's like his cousin, but now they brought him back, and then they made it where he was the secret. Spoiler alert for the Heroes in Crisis miniseries, he was the murderer. For those of you familiar, Heroes in Crisis is about like the sanctuary where all the superheroes go to relax, and then Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman come in one day, and all the heroes that were in there are dead. And I think Roy Harper, who's one of Green Lantern's sidekicks, is one of them.
Yeah, he was Speedy and became Arsenal.
It was a lot of weird characters, but you find out it was Wally West who killed them all. And one of the things you can see I actually did when I found out that I actually did a video on my blog called "Why Does DC Hate Wally West?"
Yeah. I remember you tweeting about that and everything. And
you're right. It was so shocking to me. I couldn't believe it. So, but since AT&T has taken over, Wally West is all of a sudden getting a little bit more prominence. He was in a series called Flash Forward, and I think
him popping up again.
So he's not a Flash. They were not going to call him Kid Flash. He's a Blue Lantern now, is my understanding.
Don't get me started on the whole Lantern thing.
Yeah, there should just be green and yellow. But I think I had said that way a long time ago, was when they introduced the new Kid Flash. I said they should just make Wally, make him a Green Lantern or something. That way they can keep him around. But so I guess someone saw my tweet out there and said, "Hey, let's do this, but make him a Blue Lantern so this guy won't sue us." But
Right.
really, back to your original point about these firings, AT&T is really cracking the whip on Warner Media, which owns DC Comics.
Right.
And they're basically saying, if you don't turn this around, there's actually rumors that AT&T wants to dump DC Comics.
Which is right where I was going. Yeah.
And Marvel is waiting in the wings. They have been trying to buy DC Comics
since the
70s.
Really?
So, oh yeah, there's this.
I've seen the rumors about like they're talking about that, like there's rumors flying around out there in the ether that there's a potential merger between the universes in the works.
In the 70s, Warner actually wasn't going to sell DC to Marvel, but they were going to license them. And I can't remember his name, but there was a really famous artist in the 70s, and they asked him if this was true, and he said, "Oh yeah, there's a sketchbook somewhere in the Marvel vault where all the artists who were active at the time and at Marvel drew versions of the DC characters."
Wow.
And he said when we were talking about, like I said, they weren't actually going to buy them out. It was just going to be a licensing deal. We turned this in to I can't remember the guy's name, but whoever was the director of Marvel at the time, definitely wasn't Ike Perlmutter. Whenever they turned it into him, he loved it and tried to go for it. But Devil's Due Comics actually threatened to sue based on a monopoly law, because Marvel would have controlled something like 75% of the markets.
Well, that would still be the case because they're still far and away the big two.
Oh yeah, definitely. I don't even think anyone comes close. I guess maybe, like you said, maybe Valiant or Dark Horse or something.
No, actually, at least according to this chart that I have, it's just for January. But according to that, actually, it's Marvel at just shy of 40%, DC at just shy of 30%, and then it's Image at like 5.6%. Valiant doesn't even show up.
Oh wow,
10, which shocked me. I was surprised by that.
Yeah, I'm surprised Image is still up there.
Yeah. I guess they just.
I guess Spawn is carrying them. It's the only thing I can.
Well, they're Spawn, and maybe there's just enough of a market for all of the various independent stories that they do, or who knows? Maybe they're. I have no idea what kind of deals they've got with, like with Top Cow and with whatever the other ones are, but. Maybe there's still stuff going on with graphic novels of those old books.
And also, Image for a while had licensed some film adaptions for comic books, so that could also be. I think that's how Dark Horse is kind of staying alive. Is people keep buying the Dark Horse Star Wars comics?
Oh yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, and the Dark Horse era of Star Wars comics. But some really good stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, you got Dark Empire. I mean, just that in and of itself was phenomenal. And you've got there are lots of the Old Republic, Origins of the Jedi.
That was my favorite from Dark Horse was the Old Republic stuff.
And they created some great characters too, like Exar Kun, Naomi Sunrider. Yeah, just characters that really kind of took on a life of their own in the old EU, but that's a whole other whole other show, man.
Yeah.
So there's possibly some truth to these rumors that, frankly, I was completely ignoring. That Marvel and DC could be looking at a merger in the near future,
and that would shake things up because I've always said
huge.
Yeah, and I have the lady who did the cover art for my novel. She's a huge DC fan, and I always say if Batman were Marvel, I would be all Marvel because after Batman, the next 4 superheroes in my top 5 were all Marvel characters.
Okay,
so just being honest, and
that's fair.
But Batman keeps me acquainted with the DC universe. So if Marvel was to play, and you said they each have something like 30%, man, that would be huge. Could you imagine though? This is my only concern with that. That if Disney did a Batman movie, what would that look like? I have to admit that they would just release it under their Fox banner now.
I don't want to see. I would not want to see an MCU Batman.
Yeah, I agree.
I have no. I would have no interest.
The MCU is its own thing, and I'm a fan of it. Leave it be.
Yeah. I mean, the MCU is fine for what it is. And I like it for what it is. But
You're right.
Batman, there is no like really good version of Batman that has a home in the MCU.
Right.
I'm
totally in agreement with you.
All right. That's good. We are completely good. Now, there's a part of me that would love to see Batman just drop in and just completely screw up the X-Men. I would love that.
They actually do have a lot of crossovers that were written in the 90s.
Yep.
And
I actually just picked up the trade paperback of the old DC versus Marvel amalgam stuff. I saw that at my local library for sale for like $2. I'm like, yes. Gave it to my daughter, who I've successfully turned into a comic nerd. And it was like, here, you were wondering if this existed? Yes, it does. Here, enjoy. She's like, what is going on?
Yes. And I would actually love what I would think is, if I was Marvel and I'm chomping at the bit, and this is me playing if I was Marvel CEO. What I would do is, if this opportunity came up, I 100% would buy, but I would make it where kind of like how Marvel used to do their Ultimate imprint and then the mainstream imprint.
Yeah, I would probably.
Marvel are two different universes that mirror each other.
Yeah, I would probably try to keep the two separate, because, like Jake says, the idea of trying to merge them into one universe, I don't think so. I mean,
and think about all the problems it caused when they merged the Ultimate Universe with the mainstream universe, because now you have two Spider-Men. Now, the animated series Ultimate Spider-Man, they fixed that problem with giving Miles a new code name.
Okay.
And what works for me, I'm fine with that. But for some reason in the comic books, they don't want to do that. They want to keep calling him Spider-Man, and it's like, okay, Miles. The Spider-Verse movie healed my connection to Miles Morales. I thought that was the best take on the character. So now I'm okay with. Before, I hated him. In fact, I stopped buying Spider-Man comic books when he came into the mainstream universe. But because I just think in the Ultimate Universe, he was a very poorly conceived character. However, when I saw Spider-Verse, I was like, okay, there is some value to this character. And same with the Spider-Man PS4 game. He has really great character, a great character arc in the video game as well. And so I'm like, okay, now I see how he can connect to Spider-Man. And so I just don't see that working out in the DC context. I could maybe see them one or two, like if they want to throw in Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, kind of the Trinity, in just to get sales up for a little bit. But as far as like including the Green Lanterns, well, then they have them messing with the Nova Corps, and
that's just it. There's a lot of similarity between certain characters and everything, because what's his name? Icon. He's a superhero in the DC universe. Him and Blue Marvel are basically the same character. I don't know; those are kind of lower tier Justice League. Yeah. Well, I remember Icon because I remember DC's Milestone imprint.
Right. Yes, and they've actually brought him into the mainstream universe now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. He is in there, though. Like you said, he's a lower tier character, kind of like Mr. Mirage is Image's version of Superman. He exists within the DC universe as well, but you don't really come across him. Kind of like Sentry doesn't really show up in Marvel world very often.
And also, like, are you going to because forever there's this big debate on, can Hulk beat Superman? And so that, to me, and I'm thinking DC versus Marvel, the fans voted that Superman would win. So Superman does beat Hulk, but they made him the Professor Hulk. So I was kind of like, that's a little bit of a cheat,
It is a bit of a cop out, and I think they did that very much on purpose to keep that debate alive.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And they did weird ones like Robin versus Jubilee and stuff. But anyway,
I think Robin destroys her.
Right. Yes.
I think Jubilee comes under a lot of unnecessary flack. Like, I don't think she's as lame as everybody says, but Robin destroys her.
Right. And so are they going to answer these questions? Because some fans do. Can Sentry beat Superman? Because Sentry can actually alter matter. That's one of his powers. And would he be able to beat Super? That's actually how he beats Hulk in World War Hulk. Is he alters Hulk's matter so it lowers his rage, and that's how he's able to beat him. So I don't know.
Well, I guess it depends on. If I were writing it, it would depend greatly upon Superman's level of solar charge at that particular point in time.
Yes.
If his batteries are a little low, then Sentry could alter his matter so that he could, to affect Superman's ability to continue to absorb energy from the sun. But if his batteries are fully charged, then he can resist it.
Right. And
that's the way I would go with it.
I actually stumbled upon a blog article that made the case that Namor could beat Superman if the battle took place underwater. And I actually thought that was really interesting. Yeah. Well, no, but remember, Namor is strong enough to challenge Captain Marvel, who I guess now is the strongest character physically. So
I roll.
Yeah. But he did. But he said he made it clear the battle would have to be underwater for Namor to win. So whatever.
If we're making that stipulation, and of course, if the latest incarnation of Namor is that powerful, okay. I've never once conceived of Namor as anywhere near that powerful.
Yeah, right. Well, don't forget he lifted an Air Force carrier with one hand. So that's
freaking Brandon Routh lifted a whole continent laced with kryptonite while he had a kryptonite shard shoved into his side. So there.
You got a point. Yes, thank you, Bryan Singer.
Yeah. I remember watching that going like, okay, now there is always a whole, because he's Superman can, overcome his weakness and everything and his will and yada, yada, yada. But you just had him getting thrown around by Lex Luthor.
I actually saw that movie with my dad in theaters. He and I were sitting next to each other. And when he did that, he pushed that. My dad laughed. He laughed out loud. He grew up with a strong Superman, right? Christopher Reeves and all this. And he remembered, Lois and Clark, and so then
he's not the strong Superman I have an issue with.
Right.
5 minutes before that.
Yeah.
Well, and when 5 minutes before that, he was getting kicked around by Lex Luthor.
Right. And also, what they were going to do in the sequel was even more mind-boggling because they were going to make that Kandor. That was going to turn into Kandor, which is in a bottle in Superman's Fortress of Solitude.
It is. It's one of those things where it's like I'd kind of be okay with it, actually. Fine. You want to have Kandor, but Bottle City, let's face it, that's not going to translate well into film. Okay. Right. I'm all right. Other Kryptonians show up and they live on a floating rock orbiting the Earth.
Well, a lot of people think that was the inspiration because they did that whole story in DC that didn't sell very well. They were doing it to compete with Secret Empire from Marvel, which was also awful. But they did the whole storyline where Superman is able to make Kandor a proper size again. He actually and so the Kryptonians then turn right around because they're not born with Superman's characteristics, right? He was raised by humans, so they turn around and try to conquer Earth so they can get the power of the sun. And so
I think I remember hearing about this. Yes.
Oh yeah. It wasn't impressive. It did not. The story arc did not impress me. To me, Superman didn't have enough of turmoil on the situation, and that was my whole thing. That was my whole problem with it. It didn't impress me. And also it was the New 52 Superman, who I don't like. I thought that personification was awful.
The New 52 was a horrible idea from the beginning.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm glad that they kind of finally admitted that.
Yes.
They kind of like, you know what? This was all dumb. It was doomed to fail from the beginning. What were we thinking?
And the DC Rebirth was a good idea until they connected it to Watchmen. I was like, why would you do that?
I guess they needed a reason for why they I guess they were like, just, we need a reason for why the New 52 and everything was so screwed up and everything. And what's going to be your reason for that? It should be something has to do with a story somewhere. How many characters are powerful enough to just completely reshape?
And see, that's to me like one of the reasons I don't like Watchmen is I think that as for all the crap Superman gets and even Captain Marvel, I think Dr. Manhattan is one of the most overpowered beings I've read. At least with the Monitor from the DC, he was featured recently in the CW crossover. The Monitor he's just kind of, and he has this antipathy about him, so he only shows up if it's absolutely necessary. Right. But Dr. Manhattan, he's like around and is active and is doing things, and I'm like, well, no one can beat him. What that's the, and they so much admit that,
especially within his universe. Yeah, especially Dr. Manhattan within his universe.
Right.
No one out. He's literally the only one with actual superpowers.
Right.
So,
yeah, he's the only one.
Yeah, and he's also super intelligent. So even like Ozymandias could possibly outsmart him, maybe.
Right.
But you can be smarter, but there's also, if you're like, you've got to be like a lot smarter.
Right.
You've got to be like, you can't just be a little bit smarter to overcome this much power difference. You've got to be like this much smarter.
Well, and one thing that's kind of funny is in Doomsday Clock, which shows the crossover. I think DC kind of figured this out because there's actually a scene where Lex Luthor mocks Ozymandias, and he's like, "Oh, you think you're so smart, but you did this to the most powerful being in your universe, and now he's on this rampage." So that's kind of what it is Dr. Manhattan, they kind of make him responsible for all the crises. Like that's basically what they say. Or he's at least observing all them happening. He can see all time or whatever.
Okay.
Like, don't recommend. I like Jeff Johns. We mentioned him earlier.
Yeah.
I like Jeff Johns. He's a really great writer. Batman Earth 1, one of my best favorite reboots of Batman. Doomsday Clock, you can tell after like the 5th issue that it's gone off the rails. Like when you get to issue 5, you close it and go, they don't know what to do next. Like you literally think that because the first 4 issues, great, then immediate drop off.
Well, yeah, you get that. You definitely get that from time to time, and especially major comic arcs where they didn't completely think it through, and you can kind of tell like. One that I did read going back a ways now is No Man's Land.
Yeah.
Great idea to start with, but it became pretty clear pretty quick. That's like, you guys really don't know how you're going to wrap this up, do you?
Well, that was
and then it just kind of like just wrapped up.
Right. And Tom DeFalco, who wrote for Marvel forever, I think he was even their editor-in-chief at one point. That was his big complaint about them, is they would start these story arcs and he would go, how is this ending? How are you going to end this? And
I probably pay you writers.
Yeah. Well, they made him the editor-in-chief, but then they got mad at him because I remember someone said he was a wartime editor-in-chief. So because they hired him when Marvel sales were really low, he gets them back up and then they fired him. And which I think people have said that about Dan for DC Comics, was whenever he became one of the main editors and whatnot, I think the chief creative officer, DC sales were kind of suffering. And at first he was doing good. He brought in the Final Crisis, which was, and then the first 52, not the new 52, but the first 52, which was actually really good. It was a good reboot. And then he was like, I don't think I did enough. Let's do Flashpoint. And that brought in the new 52. Yeah. And I remember at first I didn't know Flashpoint was a reboot because it wasn't called Crisis. So they didn't call it the Flashpoint Crisis. So and then next thing I know, I'm seeing characters from Milestone in the DC universe popping up. Sure. It's like, where did they come from? But again, Icon and Rocket, I think it's the Psychic's name, they're great characters. And so is Static Shock. I'm glad they brought
Yeah.
them over. Great characters, but it's kind of like I can't think of the guy's name, but he looks like a wannabe Red Hood, where he has the red mask all the way around.
I have no idea.
I can't think of his name. It's like I want to say it's Red Devil, but I think I'm confusing him with someone else. But he's from Milestone. He's a main character in Flashpoint, and I'm like, why did they make him a main character in the DC universe? Like, he's not really that big a deal.
Yeah, I haven't the foggiest idea. The only other character I really remember from Milestone was Hardware.
Yes, Hardware. Remember Hardware?
Which is, you could kind of call him another version of Steel.
Right.
Yeah, but
Steel is a better character. Let's be real.
Steel's a good character, absolutely, unless he's played by Shaquille O'Neal, in which case we forget that ever happened.
I have purposely not watched that, and I've watched some bad.
I've never seen that either.
Just to say I have. You
watched what? I'm sorry.
Huh?
Which one did you say you watched? Just to say you did.
Oh, the Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. with David
Hasselhoff.
Yes, and that was
I've never seen it,
and it was bad. Everyone thinks it's made in the 80s because the production value is so low. I was like, nope, it came out in I think 1993, something like that.
Right. Hey, Madness. I think he's talking about. I think Jacob's talking about a different Red Mask guy because Grifter, he's from Homage and everything. And how could we?
I think.
Are you talking about Grifter?
I think I am talking about Grifter.
Okay, see, Grifter ain't no wannabe. Grifter is awesome.
No, I agree.
I love Grifter.
In the DC universe, he's not from the DC universe. He was part of the Flashpoint.
Yeah. He's one that actually I would love to see more of.
Really?
Actually, I would. Yeah, because I got into Image a bit when it first launched, and one of the ones I really liked was Jim Lee's Wildcats, which was. Grifter was part of that team, and he was easily the best character in that team. He was
okay. See, I didn't read a lot of Wildcats.
Okay, yeah, he was. He was. He was that stereotypical character. He's the cocky loner who's kind of always just barely managing to squeak by, but he does always manage to squeak by.
Right.
And kind of a less gruff Wolverine, you could say.
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah, he's in the movie because they did an animated film, Justice League Flashpoint Paradox.
Yeah.
And he's in that, and I actually did enjoy him in that. That was a good film. Yeah.
I liked that whole animated version of that story, and they did include Grifter in that, which personally I appreciated.
And one thing is you can again tell AT&T is kind of taking the reins. Is they're making Warner Animation just do one more in that series. Because I think there's a total of, oh man, I'm gonna get this wrong probably, but I think there's 13, and they're saying, oh no, this next one's called Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. That's going to be the finale to the series. I'm a little disappointed because I actually was enjoying it more than the DCEU, with a couple of exceptions. I just mean overall.
In all honesty, yes. DC animated, although it's definitely had some bumps recently, and that's going to be, and we can talk about that in just a minute when we get into the perhaps the why the comics and everything have been struggling, because I think they're related. But yeah, I would say overall DC animated is still better than the DCEU, and I actually like the DCEU a lot more than you do, but the DC animated is overall still better quality.
Right, and Marvel, they're dropping the ball with their animation. Their cartoons, which were king in the 90s, right?
Yes, they were.
They were king, and they have the last good movie that they did was a Punisher Black Widow crossover film.
Yeah,
I think it was called Black Widow Punisher Avengers Confidential. Yep. That was the last good one they did.
Yeah, I enjoyed that, but it wasn't great. It wasn't one that
it wasn't great.
Yeah. It's kind of one that I'm like, I need to rewatch that. Or they did. I think they licensed it out, but there were like these manga versions. There was an X-Men, a Wolverine, a Blade, and an Iron Man.
The Iron Man ones are very good.
Iron Man, I thought that was all right. The X-Men one was all right. Wolverine one just got ridiculous. It's like, really, Wolverine is lifting a giant 40-foot tall robot? No. No. He's not that strong. I'm sorry. No. In general, I find Wolverine to be an overrated character personally.
Oh, really? Wow.
I do. I do think he's overrated, mostly because characters with like really pronounced healing factors like him kind of annoy me a little bit, specifically because I think they exist only so that the artist can draw battle damage.
Yeah, I agree, and I do agree with that. See, that's how I feel about Deathstroke. I'm kind of like, Deathstroke started out as a Teen Titans villain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then next thing you know, he's Batman's, match. He's the other side of the coin for Batman. And I'm like, where did that come from? He's a Teen Titans assassin that Robin beats up in his early days. And so I'm kind of like, how did he become? And in fact, the original Teen Titan cartoon, Robin, I think gets defeated by him, but then trains and comes back and beats him.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like when did this Teen Titan villain become so big? You know.
Yeah. You know, it was honestly, I think it's the aesthetic.
Yeah.
You know, it's the Boba Fett effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. He looks really cool. He's got to be a badass.
Which you could tell. His ending for Return of the Jedi, George Lucas did not intend for him to be what the fans think he is now, right? Including me.
Yeah. That's very, very clear. But you know, why not? Let's make him a badass. I actually like what Deathstroke has become, but perhaps it's because I was never familiar with him as a Teen Titans villain.
Right.
I actually got introduced to him through Batman, so it didn't seem.
Yeah, that's what.
He didn't seem out of left field to me.
I know the guy. I know the guy he's the editor-in-chief of a fan site called Gotham Knights. And one time, and he was talking about, because he's a fan of the Batman Arkham games, and he was talking about how great Deathstroke is, and I was like, he's a Teen Titan villain, right? And he goes, well, no, what are you talking about? He's a Batman villain, and yada yada yada. And I'm like, nope, dude, he is a Teen Titan villain.
In origin, that is absolutely correct. Yes, he was a Teen Titans villain, and it is kind of hard to square the circle between I'm getting beat by a bunch of sidekicks to I'm going toe-to-toe with Batman.
Yeah, Young Justice, the animated show, they kind of make a joke because there's this character who has a dumb name, but he's actually a really great villain, a Sportsmaster. And he is shown to be like this formidable opponent who can even challenge Batman. And in the Young Justice show, they kind of make a joke because they have an episode where Deathstroke and Sportsmaster are in the same episode, and they kind of make a joke about Sportsmaster saying, "Oh, well, I was the first." He doesn't say badass, but he uses another word. I was the first tough guy or something like that. And I kind of chuckle because you have to know a little bit of the history of the characters. But okay, I was like, that's a good line there.
Yeah, it's like your name is Sportsmaster.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, stupid name, but he is a really great villain otherwise.
Fair enough. Fair enough, yes. There is always the argument that there are no bad characters, only bad writers.
Yeah. I've heard, yes. And for comic books, that seems to be true.
Yeah. There is much truth to that. Although there are some characters that I would argue that, in fact, are bad. Like Batman villain Orca. Just no.
Yeah,
I remember when that origin
eaten by Killer Croc.
What's that?
I think she got eaten by Killer Croc.
Good. I remember actually that I remember that run, and that was just a bad run.
Yeah,
that whole
right after No Man's Land.
Yeah, right after No Man's Land, I was just like, I'm actually thinking of dropping Batman.
Yeah,
what is going on? You're clearly messing this up, people. But
right.
So, comics is in trouble.
Right.
I mean, to the extent that AT&T is legitimately thinking about shutting DC down, at least the publishing end of it, and or selling it possibly to Marvel. Although how that would work with film rights and everything, I don't know. I mean, let's face it, Marvel isn't going to want it unless they can buy it whole cloth.
Yeah. They bought 20th Century Fox just to get the X-Men and Fantastic Four.
True. True. But at the same time, is AT&T going to want to sell off the film rights to what is a troubled universe, but these characters are cash cows if they just let them be for a little bit, or bring in the right people to turn the whole thing around. Regardless, it's the fact that this is even a discussion shows that things are in serious turmoil.
Mm-hmm.
Why is perhaps the big question, because we're a long ways. We're 30 years removed almost from the speculator bubble of the 90s.
Right.
That can't just be the reason anymore. So why is the big question?
I honestly think it's because they were convinced that by Twitter. Mm-hmm. It's actually an interesting thing. I'm stealing from someone else, obviously, but the Twitter effect makes people think that. So like, what are they called? The Mary Sue, for instance, they're an SJW thing. They read comic books and manga and whatnot, mm-hmm. and they grade them based on how they are intersectionally, right? So
how well they pass the Bechdel test.
Right. Yes, exactly. And so I really think that Marvel and DC started to believe the hype around that, because
this really was their audience.
Right. They thought, but here's the thing, and I've argued with people about this. SJWs don't buy comics. They'll buy a comic every once in a while. But they don't regularly go to the comic book store and purchase these things. I don't even think they go see the movies. I think they say they do, but then they just read about it on Wikipedia. But and I really think Marvel and DC thought that their audience has changed, because one of the things they got accused of, especially DC, was from going from the 50s to the 60s and the 70s, DC lost touch with their audience. They changed Batman, right? He was this dark, brooding character, and then they made him almost a caricature.
Right. Yeah.
Right, and pretty much his 80s persona has stayed how he is. And I really think that DC and Marvel were afraid of that happening again. We're going to lose touch with our audience, so we're going to bring in younger people. Well, what's Twitter saying? Twitter is not real life, and I think that they thought it was real life. So that you end up having, instead of introducing a female character who is a Viking like Thor, like say Angela, which I think they did add, like I said, they added her to the Thor mythos. Yeah,
they did bring her in.
And I think now she has her comic is now called As Guardians of the Galaxy. But anyway, they instead of introducing new characters or characters they had acquired, they tried to change the old ones. And DC is guilty of this, with the exception of their big three. They've always been smart about their big three. But outside of that, they want to change all their characters. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a mistake. So a new, what Richard Meyer calls the normie, a normie goes to see the Joss Whedon's first Avengers film, right? He walks out of that thinking that's the lineup. He doesn't know that Ant-Man and Wasp were involved, and Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch joined sometime later, or that the Avengers actually found Captain America. That's the original comic. He doesn't know this. He just assumes that.
They don't know. They don't care.
Right. So then he goes and buys the comic book, and what does he see? He sees Jane Foster is Thor, Falcon is now Captain America, Ant-Man and the Vision are having these arguments about whether a robot has a soul. This was actually in a comic book, by the way. I'm not lying. Yeah. And the guy's like, where's the Chitauri? Where's Loki? Where's Black Widow?
Why is Iron Man in white armor establishing a dictatorship over cities? What is going on?
Right, exactly. Why is Iron Man dead? I think
that one too.
Yeah, because they killed him. He wasn't killed off at that point, but they had, when Civil War the movie came out, they did Civil War 2 in the comics, and Tony Stark got killed off. And like I said, now they've confirmed he is dead. So, so a normie goes, well, I don't want to buy this now. What is this? The movie is better.
And then that gets you right into, wait a minute, I thought this was number one.
Right. Yes. I thought this was number one.
But now why are there 4 number ones on the rack?
Right.
The same character.
And also they get you with the variants. I mean, I'm the sucker, right? I bought 4 of these things. And this one I paid more for so I could get the artist to sign it.
But it's Neil Adams and he's a legend, so it's okay.
Right, yes. And also, I'm a super fan. That's expected of me. I'm going, especially for Batman stuff, I'm going to do that. But a regular person who goes to see Ben Affleck and Superman cry about, or Henry Cavill cry about their mothers to each other, they're going to go, man, Batman's kind of lame. And he murders people. So, because anyone who knows Batman knows his one rule. And so, despite what, I don't know all that again, but just,
I mean, honestly, that gets right into the whole issue with the whole way the DCEU developed in the first place, where a lot of it, not exclusively, a lot of it had to do with just the execs wanting to rush and catch up with Marvel, as opposed to letting things develop. So we got, instead of doing a Batman origin story, which I would agree we didn't really need, but was jumping into 40-year-old, cynical and bitter Batman necessarily the best option either? It's fair to say the answer to that is no.
Right, and there's this animated film. It's not connected to the universe we were talking about before, and I actually don't really like it that much, but it's called Justice League New Frontier. And there's the scene where...
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
There's a scene where it shows Batman in his classic costume with the purple gloves, but he scares a child. And so later, Superman comes to see him, and he's in more like his modern Batman costume, and Robin is there. Mm-hmm. And Superman says, what are you doing with a sidekick? And why are you dressed like that? And Batman says, I want to scare villains, not children. And I really think that's so someone who grew up like with me with Batman the animated series, you go to see Ben Affleck play him and you're kind of stunned. But then you also go to the comic book store and that Batman is nothing like that Batman. So even if you liked Dawn of Justice, and granted there's plenty of reasons to like it, you're going to be really confused unless you just pick up The Dark Knight Returns. Because then you at least go, oh, now I get the Batman design.
Right. Which, I mean, they said they were drawing heavily on that, which, I mean, they clearly were.
Right.
But again, is that what you do as your opening intro of Batman into this particular universe? You could easily argue the answer to that is no.
And someone asked me one time, do you have to be a nerd or a geek to make these movies? And I thought, no. Christopher Nolan is not a nerd. Like, he's this really great filmmaker, but he at least had his fingers on the pulse of the fans. And I really think that with the comic books, Marvel and DC, in trying to be in touch with their fans, have lost touch with their actual fans. And I really think now, and I'm not saying he's going to do a bad job, but I really think Robert Pattinson being cast as Batman shows this. If you look at all the buzz that was going online, people were talking about, we want to see Armie Hammer as Batman. We want to see, and they may not have just been able to get him. That's fine, but his name escapes me. But there was another guy. He's been in a ton of B movies, but he's a real martial artist. And they were saying we want to have him. And in fact, on my blog, one of my guest contributors wrote a whole article advocating for this guy to be Batman. And then we get announced that it's Robert Pattinson, who is a good actor. Forget Twilight. Robert Pattinson is a good actor, and I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. But to me, it still shows, oh, we're out of touch with our fans. We're out of touch with our fan base. And to me, the more casting news I hear about the upcoming Batman film, the more this confirms me. Like, why is what's his name? Andy Serkis. Why is he playing Alfred? Why isn't Andy Serkis one of the bad guys?
It is an odd thing.
Yeah,
I'm not. Andy Serkis is Alfred, but then again, who knows? I mean, Serkis has got.
He's a great actor. He'll do great. I mean,
he's seriously got some range, definitely, and maybe I'm curious to see what he's going to bring to the role.
Mhm.
I'll be honest, I think it's going to be hard to beat Michael Caine as Alfred. Just because, I mean, he was just a great Alfred,
Yes.
especially for that particular movie. I mean, that wasn't the Alfred. That wasn't necessarily the former British special ops spy Alfred that
Mhm.
he's kind of become in the comics, or in which they were doing in Gotham.
Right.
But still, for that performance of just your whole job is to just be Bruce Wayne's foil,
Right.
Be his conscience essentially. He was great, and
Oh yeah, and
it's gonna be hard to beat that.
and Gotham is a perfect example of a show that, while it did have a lot of missteps, as TV shows that run for over a year have, they still had a pulse on what the fans wanted. So I was never real. At first, I was not on board with Gordon being the main character. I wanted to see Bruce Wayne grow up, but they had me hooked with how they introduced the Riddler, how they introduced the proto Joker, as I call him.
Yep.
And they had two different versions of the Joker. The first version was the crazy,
very Heath Ledger-esque.
Yeah, the run amok Joker, and then the next one was the Scott Snyder, more cold and calculating Joker. And I thought that, I was like, wow, how do you show two different versions of the Joker in one show? That, and how they did it, I thought was really clever.
Yeah. Actually, I had a long conversation with that with Crystal a couple of weeks ago, just largely about Gotham, and that we covered a lot of that. And overall, I'm a fan of the show. Overall.
Oh yeah, me too.
But so essentially, we're coming down to, as far as why the comics are struggling, at least right now. One, just poorly merging things with the movies. Like,
right.
As you said, they should kind of line up at least a little bit.
Right.
Like you said, a lineup is an easy one. Keeping the characters like personalities more or less the same would be logical.
Right.
And Marvel had kind of set itself up for that with the Ultimate imprint, even though that wasn't the original intent. They could have just kept that and been like, if you want your movie Avengers, here they are. But they didn't do that. And of course, DC is kind of, again, with the movies and the comics, have just been all over the place for the last few years, as far as what the hell is going on with any individual storyline. And I say that as somebody who has long loved DC. I'm definitely I love both, but I'm definitely a DC over Marvel guy. That said, they ain't running it right. But so you got the mismanagement of like the way they should be marketing each other going on. Plus, it's a clear case of go woke, go broke.
Right. A perfect example of that.
Yeah. Which I mean, that's even been a thing. That's part of why they keep rebooting freaking Captain Marvel.
Right.
The sales just aren't there to keep a story ongoing.
Yeah, and that's why they moved her to the Avengers, right? She's not in the Avengers in the films, but they moved her there because they can't keep her comic book up, but they don't want to tell Gail Simone, sorry, we're canceling Captain Marvel. They're just telling her, oh, we moved her to the Avengers, and she's going to kind of be the field commander or whatever.
Well, and that's one of the things that makes it so difficult. It's like, okay, so this person's on that team now, but I thought she was just doing in Guardians of the Galaxy. What the ever living crap? Then Iron Man's in Guardians of the Galaxy, and then apparently Angela's been in Guardians of the Galaxy, and
that's one thing that was, if you read when Stan Lee and Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby were writing Marvel, they kept the continuity tight. Like they like, if you read, there's this great, I actually own it. I have some original Stan Lee, Steve Ditko Spider-Man, and there's an issue where Spider-Man's fighting the Lizard, and the Human Torch just shows up. And of course, the Human Torch, he doesn't know the whole backstory of the Lizard, so he is not holding back. And so Spidey just basically tricks him into leaving. Well, apparently, Human Torch was absent from an issue of the Fantastic Four, and there's like a little note in the Spider-Man comic. This is where he was in issue whatever Fantastic Four.
I remember those little notes.
Yeah,
that would show up. And it was like, and it would be like, so and so is referencing something that happened, in this comic.
Right. See issue.
See issues. So there you go, true believers. And freaking Stan Lee, man, he really was the freaking man. I tell you what. But
and if you read, you read Batman, especially in the Tom King, when Tom King is writing it at the same time as James Tynion is writing Detective Comics, you are going to get really confused because in the first, I think, 7 volumes of Detective Comics, the Batman family is there. Damian is off with the Teen Titans and Nightwings and Bloodhaven and whatnot, but they have Tim Drake as Robin, and they have Batwoman, and they have, I think, for a while, Clayface, he becomes reformed, and so he's there, and they have Azrael, and so the Batman family is operating. But then in the Tom King, which is supposed to be at the same time, Batman's a loner, and everyone hates him, and it's like, wait, but he's there with Tim Drake right now. What's going on? It's a very confusing thing.
Yeah, you've got two different versions of Batman competing at the same time. It's like they might both be interesting. I personally, I love the Bat Family Batman. It's kind of like my favorite Batman, the one who's like, he's the general in charge of his, in charge of his little army and directing them. Okay, you go take out that mob family over there. We've got a couple of run amok metas over there. Nightwing, handle that for me, please. That sort of thing. That's my favorite Batman.
Yeah, I agree. I always say it's the Walker Texas Ranger Batman because if you watch the last 3 seasons of Walker Texas Ranger, he has these 2 Rangers that he kind of sends out to do his legwork. I think Chuck Norris was starting to get older, so he would always send. I think their names were Gage and Cindy. He would send them off to do the legwork, and then he would come in and fight the bad guy at the end. And I think Batman works best that way. He's connecting with Jim Gordon, but then he's sending Robin and Batgirl to figure out all the clues in these different areas, and then he comes in and fights the Joker at the end. I think that's the best Batman. Especially
if they were to do something crazy, like allow characters to age.
Right.
I mean, I swear the only 2 characters that have ever been allowed to age in comic books are Bucky Barnes and Dick Grayson.
Yes. Yes, but again, Rebirth changed that. Dick Grayson is young again. They made it where instead of Batman raising him, he was actually 16 when he became Robin. What? And no. It's the thing. Maybe 14, but he was a teenager instead of being, I think originally he was 12, but they raised him up because they wanted him to be able to drive, basically.
No. Just no.
Yeah. Oh. I think it was because they were having trouble explaining how there are 4 Robins, so they just made it where Dick Grayson was shorter, Jason Todd was shorter than Dick Grayson, then it was Tim Drake he was the longest Robin, and then now it's Damian.
No.
Tim Drake is my favorite Robin. I like Dick Grayson as Nightwing. So
and Dick Grayson is great as Nightwing. I mean, honestly, that gets into the biggest reason why I kind of fell out of collecting comics is ultimately nothing significant ever really changes, not for long. And
I'm waiting for Alfred to come back because Tom King killed off Alfred, and James Tynion took over writing in January of Batman because DC fired Tom King basically, and James Tynion took over, but Alfred is still dead in Tynion's arc right now. So I'm curious though how long that is going to last.
Right. No one stays dead in comics.
Yeah.
I had figured out.
Uncle Ben has stayed dead.
What's that?
Uncle Ben has stayed dead.
Fair. Uncle Ben has stayed dead. If they ever bring Uncle Ben back, I swear I am marching to Marvel Studios. I'm going to burn it down. I'm not even joking. I will lead a freaking revolt. The Boogaloo will start over Uncle Ben. I swear. I'll be running, throw a Molotov cocktail, screaming, "Thanks, Obama!"
Yeah, exactly.
Woo, that was a tangent.
Yeah.
But that gets right into again, why I stopped, because even back in the 90s when they did the whole death of Superman thing, I was like, that ain't gonna last, because already I had figured out that it's like, but probably mostly from reading X-Men comics and like how many times has Jean Grey been dead?
At least 4 now. Yeah.
Oh gosh, at least.
At least, yeah.
That's a bare minimum, man.
Yeah, one of them, she was just sent to the future. Yeah.
Yeah. So like this ain't gonna last. No one in comics stays dead. I mean, except for Uncle Ben. And it was like he'll be back. And yeah, sure enough. And don't get me wrong, it was an interesting enough story in and of itself, but it's like nothing ever really changes, which of course this is something I am gonna blame Stan Lee for, with the whole thing with keeping the illusion of change. It was his phrase. I was like, Spider-Man's gonna get married, but it's not really gonna matter. He's
the last time I remember something stuck was Peter and Mary Jane lost their baby. That was the one thing in the 90s.
Oh no, see, here's the thing. It's not that stuck. It's the fact they had a baby that didn't stick.
Oh, yeah, you got a point. Fair enough.
That's the problem. A big thing like that happens that should have long-lasting effects, but nope. And then we're gonna make a deal with Mephisto, and everything's gonna be.
Yeah, that was dumb.
It's like,
I think I didn't really feel at the time. I kind of liked it because I liked the idea that people didn't know who Spider-Man is. That's one thing that always aggravates me about the movies and even the Spider-Man PS4 video game. Everyone figures out who he is all the time, and I'm that kind of makes me angry. So I was kind of like, okay, yes, people won't know who he is, thank goodness. But then later, I was, and which Brand New Day is actually a pretty good kickoff for the new version of Spider-Man, But I was thinking later, I was like, man, that was kind of a cop out.
Yes, and actually, Mattis points out that the whole Osborn killing their baby was wiped out by the whole One More Day thing, apparently.
Yeah. Well, because they didn't get married when he wiped it out.
Yeah, it's like, oh, come up, really? It's, and what bothers me about that, and this gets right. And this gets close to wrapping up, because part of my criticism of the whole 5G or 5th generation event that DC may or may not be doing now is the fact that they kind of did that already back in the 90s when Batman got his back broken by Bane and had things taken over by Azrael. Hal Jordan went freaking bonkers, and Kyle Rayner took his place. Oliver Queen died. And
his son, right?
What's that?
His son took over. Connor
Hawk. Thank you. And of course, Wally West became. He already had been the Flash for a while, but it was definitely solidified that he had taken over from Barry Allen as the Flash.
And he was Flash forever, even when they started bringing characters back.
He was the Flash that I knew growing up reading comics. Wally West was my Flash. Hal Jordan and Kyle Rayner, not to the same extent, but I really like the Kyle Rayner Green Lantern. And of course, Superman, the death of Superman, and all of these other guys that rose up trying to fill those shoes. They had this perfectly set up, and they did it with individual stories, not as part of a giant company spanning event. They did it with individual stories, and they told them in ways that made sense within the story itself, not just for the time, not just for sales, although obviously they were done to drive sales. Especially Azrael's Batman thing. That was very much a sales driven thing that they thought was going to work really well. They were wrong. But in and of itself, that even created its own thing where Bruce Wayne came back to take the mantle away from Azrael. And that's where you really got the idea that these main characters, it's not just Clark Kent. He's Superman. It's a mantle, it's a symbol, something that can be passed down. And it's something that DC is uniquely set up for over against Marvel, where it's the fact that these characters are such archetypes. They can pass that role, that responsibility to somebody else, and they had set themselves up so perfectly for that, and then they just undid it. First with Superman, but that was always the plan. Bruce Wayne coming back, that was a oops. Nobody likes that. Nobody likes Asbats.
No, I actually think the Bruce Wayne one was meant to be permanent, because I
think it was meant to be. Like, it's just nobody liked Asbats.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it was 100% a oops. But what they should have done was actually Dick Grayson comes back, defeats Azrael, and becomes Batman. Or if they really wanted to go nuts, because let's say everybody likes Dick Grayson as Nightwing.
Right.
If they really wanted to go crazy, Tim Drake does it and becomes Batman. Yeah. Is really what I would have loved to see, because I don't think Tim Drake has quite gotten the respect that he really deserves yet.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, they've kind of tried, they moved in that direction, but if any of the Robins should be Batman, it's Tim Drake.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, Damian's a great fighter. He's not the detective.
Right.
And Tim Drake is the one Robin that could possibly be a better detective than Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
also, too, one thing that they used to do, which I don't understand. So if you didn't like it, before Hal Jordan, there was Alan Scott, I think it was, or Scott, something like that. Alan Scott.
Well, totally different kind of Green Lantern, though.
Right. He actually found like I think it was called the Starheart Lantern or whatever. Something.
Yeah.
If you didn't like,
no relation to the Green Lantern Corps.
Right. I think. Yeah. Exactly. If you didn't like that version of him, you could go and buy a Hal Jordan comic, but they also had the Earth 2 characters, and that's what had all the original characters. And eventually, I think Crisis on Infinite Earths, actually the first one, the very first reboot, actually erased all that. They made it where they were all legacy characters.
Yep.
I think Alan Scott, the first Green Lantern, he was actually erased from existence, but they did do it where Barry Allen got inspired to be Flash by the first, I think his name was Garrett.
Yeah,
Jay Garrett or something like that.
Jay Garrett.
So DC is, like you said, is in a position to do this because they've already set that up in their mythology. And then whichever one people like, just that's the one you publish the most. But you don't have to do these constant reboots and retellings. And
bringing them back.
Right. And I think one of the things that I did kind of like about the Ultimate Universe, I did kind of like, because I've been a big critic of it, was the deaths were permanent. With the exception of Captain America, they did bring him back to life. But it was this whole thing where Thor actually had to go into hell and, or not hell, but what is it called? The Asgardian heaven.
Valhalla.
Valhalla. He had to go to Valhalla and get Captain America's soul. So they made it like a quest thing, which I was okay with.
It was a big thing, and yeah.
Right, but like they killed off Professor X and he was dead. They killed off Thanos and he was dead. And I did appreciate that about it, but I think that's ultimately why they realized, we can't keep this going because we keep killing off our characters. So, Peter Parker,
it is one of the things. It's like you have to, if you're going to do that, you also have to be able to come up with new characters.
Right.
For them.
And Star Trek solved this problem by just killing off all the secondary characters, right? Ensign so-and-so, who's only been in 2 episodes and he's wearing a red uniform, he's the one that gets killed.
Right. That's true enough. And yeah, man, I actually remember Batman saying that about Tim Drake, that he would be a better Batman in the future. Which I think they have touched on that a little bit. Like, I think Tim Drake was Batman in the Batman Beyond comics for a while.
Yeah, in the New 52 Batman Beyond. Yeah, Terry McGinnis died, and then and I think at that time Bruce Wayne was like off on some quest or whatever, and so Dick Grayson basically said, "Tim Drake, you need to be Batman," because Grayson, I think in the Batman Beyond of the comics, he's missing an eye, so he can't
be old by that time too. So
yeah,
yeah. I mean, it'd be not Bruce Wayne old, but
right.
Too old to be in prime crime fighting condition, to say that.
Right.
I hated seeing that throughout all the 90s. Like, Hal Jordan came back. His first as the Spectre, and then he became the Green Lantern. And
before to be fair, he was actually a pretty good version of the Spectre. I actually liked him as the Spectre.
Well, and that's it's one of those things I'm kind of okay with. They could do that, but I kind of knew it's like, no, this is just the first step to bringing him back as Green Lantern. Yeah. it's like this isn't going to be really a thing. This is just
but to be fair, they kept him the Spectre for a long time. I think until the 2000s, he finally came back as a Green Lantern, and even then, they didn't want to accept him back or something like that.
Yeah, well, at least it's kind of doing some justice to the whole Parallax storyline,
right?
But, and then of course Kevin Smith brought Green Arrow back, which again, in and of itself, is a fine story, but it's like, no, you're undoing everything you did in like the early and mid 90s. You're completely undoing it, and you're ruining your ability to let these characters age and develop and everything, which you were set up to do, which was something that frankly was kind of unique in comics. It hadn't really been done before to such an extent. And then they just screwed it up. They undid it all. Valiant was going to be essentially doing that. If the original 90s era Valiant had continued and hadn't got messed up when they got bought up by Acclaim and everything, and trying to be Marvel, is essentially what happened to them. Because there was a clear drop off after the Chaos Effects crossover. After that, it was like there was a sharp drop off in quality.
Yeah, and one thing too is these. I feel like Valiant is making the same mistake that Warner did with the DCEU, is by just introducing Bloodshot. They're trying to copy Marvel's model, which was, we're going to introduce all the characters separately and then bring them together. Really, what DC should have done was done the Justice League first, then done spin-off origins, and that way you can say, oh well, if you can't get the same actor back, you can say, oh well, it's when they're younger, so we're getting a younger actor to portray them, and then just move forward with a Justice League series. And Valiant is but they didn't. They copied Marvel with Man of Steel and then Dawn of Justice, and it was like they realized their mistake, so they're like, okay, we're going to do, after Wonder Woman, we're going to do Justice League,
right?
Because and I think something like that, they were going to do all the spinoffs and then do Justice League, something like that. And then and I feel like Valiant is going to make the same mistake. They're going to introduce Bloodshot, and then they're going to introduce XO, and then everything.
They're actually doing unfortunately, no, it's not that coherent.
Oh, really?
No. They actually, Harbinger is now licensed out to a totally different studio.
Oh.
So
there might be all the standalone.
I think that's what we're looking at, is the more likely result of everything is these are just going to be standalone movies, that it's not going to be a shared Valiant universe, which
I'm actually okay with that then.
I'm completely okay with it. And also, I don't have high hopes for the Bloodshot movie. I'll be honest. Looking at it, I'm like, it looks like generic action movie.
I agree. I think it'll be one like you'll enjoy it, but it's not going to have lasting impressions like, say, Captain America: Winter Soldier.
Right, exactly. It's going to be one that's like, you know what? I'm going to watch this tonight.
Yeah. And popcorn. I want to eat popcorn and just enjoy my day.
Yeah, pretty much. I think that's exactly where I see it going. But before we end this, since we're way over our normal time, but how often do I get a chance to talk to somebody who knows more about comics than I do? How could you think of anything you would, if you could, be in charge for a day, how would you fix it?
Well, it would depend on which one. If I'm fixing Marvel, okay, I would at least try to line it up with the movies, like you said, with the connections. But let the writers have their own stories, but say, okay, these characters are in the Avengers right now. This is who we want to be the Avengers. And I would also, or if they're like, well, no, I want to be able to use Ant-Man for this film or for this story arc. Sorry, if I want to use Ant-Man, then I would say, okay, well, then we're going to do like the Avengers like they were after the Heroes Return arc, where it's all the Avengers and then just different ones appear for different missions.
Okay.
That way you can explain there so and so is off on a different mission, so we have, instead of using Captain America, we have to use US Agent. That's how I would do it.
Okay.
I would offer those 2 suggestions. For DC, I would just say stop screwing with your timeline. You try to create a more cohesive story arc.
Yep.
If we have to do one more reboot to make that happen, let's do it.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah. if we have to do that, that's fine. But let's do it. We don't need. If you have to do a number 1, it's going to be under a different title. So it's not just going to be Batman. It's going to be Batman Caped Crusader or Batman Dark Detective, whatever. But if we have to do that, we're going to do that. And I would suggest for DC, bring back what people love about the character. So, which I actually hear Brian Michael Bendis is doing this with Superman. Bring back those things that make him inspirational. Yep. He's a person you're supposed to aspire to be. Batman kind of killed the grunge. Like we get it. He's dark and brooding, but we're making him too hard-hearted, because the whole purpose of him doing this is to save Gotham, but he can't save Gotham if he's hard-hearted. There's this. Yeah. And whoever's on the Batman writing team, there's this great painting that Alex Ross, a legendary comic book artist, did. Yep. And it's Batman, and he's all bloody, but he's cradling a baby. Mm-hmm. And the baby's perfectly fine, but Batman is all, you could tell he went through a whole turmoil to protect this child. And I would hang that in the Batman's writing staff room. It's like, this is the Batman we want, the one who will, get beat up just to save a child. Mm-hmm. And that's what I would say. I would just say, let's do one more course correct. We'll set up a few rules. We'll hire back Chuck Dixon, and then we'll go from there.
Mm-hmm. Well, there you go. I think that actually is great advice, especially for DC. One more reboot. Get that out of your damn system. Yeah. And let's actually, yes, get back to what the people love about the characters. Because, yeah, I mean, you mentioned Batman. I think kind of since No Man's Land, they seem stuck on having to have postmodernist deconstructed Batman. Where he's just all pathos, all angst, all the time.
And it's like, one thing that I love, and Chuck Dixon, he co-created Bane, right? Mm. And Bane was a perfect adversary to Batman because he was brains and brawn. Normally Batman just had brains or just had brawns. Yep. And then, like you said, it's like they took it too far. Alan Grant and Denny O'Neil, who are both really good writers, by the way, but they just took that No Man's Land arc. I want to say Chuck Dixon kicked it off, but I could be wrong about that. It might have been Denny O'Neil who kicked it off, but just coming off that Batman who had his back broken, and then we're going straight into, like you said, deconstruct Batman. What does it mean for Gotham? And we're gonna milk and beat this dead horse till all that's left is bones. And that's why I say hire back Chuck Dixon, because he to me was the last writer who really understood the Joker. Like Scott Snyder writes a good Joker, but Chuck Dixon really nailed the Joker when he was writing Batman. He's the one who did the Last Laugh, which is the one where Joker thinks he has cancer. Oh, and so he does like one final scheme that just tear apart Gotham. Great story. So yeah, I would bring him back to at least write the principal Batman title.
That would be okay. I'd like to see Chuck Dixon come back and actually, maybe get Batman back into shape. And
I mean, he's right. For Sylvester Stallone. How is DC not bringing him back?
Start bringing and start developing them too, getting them in a direction. And this would be huge for me. Let the characters age.
Yeah.
And let them die.
Yeah.
Let them act, and let somebody new take over. Again, DC in particular is well set up for this. All the main heroes have all got all kinds of sidekicks and everything, all kinds of like young proteges they could, just grab and say, you're the new guy. Mm-hmm. And like you said, if somebody doesn't like that, there's a whole freaking like stable to choose from.
Right.
You know? If somebody wants there to be a Batwoman, you've got Huntress, you've got Batgirl, you've got Cassandra Cain, you've got any number of people that you could, pull from to fill that role. And you can rotate it out until you find somebody that somebody really likes.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, and of course, Madison points out things like removing some of the newer, fluffier, useless characters. Which is definitely a thing out there, but what are you going to do? And I think there's probably another direction or two we could go, but like I said, we are way the heck over time. So, Jacob, thanks for coming by for an extremely long but very fun conversation about comic books in general. We actually did spend some time talking about the state of the industry. And we'll have to have you back on again at some point in the near future to pick up on one of the threads that we kind of left dangling over here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I had a great time. I can talk about comic books for like 5 hours straight. My wife road trip. She was not happy by the end of it.
Well, understand. We'll have to have you back on here just to help save your marriage. And in next week we're going to have Whitney Tornado Sis 6. You will know her as on Twitter, and she's going to be talking about how she no longer identifies as a libertarian and just kind of some of that evolution. So be here for that. And after that, I'm working on something. I hope it comes out because it could be a particularly interesting conversation, but I'm going to leave that as a teaser just in case. All right. Well, until next time, thanks for coming by.